Dan Trolaro, he's the Assistant Executive Director for the New Jersey Council on Compulsive Gambling. He graduated from the College of New Jersey with a BS in Finance and a concentration in Economics. He also holds his MS in Psychology from California Coast University. Dan's spoken at a dozen of events around the country with internet and mobile device gambling, as well as emerging trends in sports gambling, whether he's speaking on prevention strategies, treatment resources, responsible gaming, or recovery sources. Dan discusses the concepts of gambling, addiction, switching, co-occurrence, and behaviors associated with this devastating addiction. And I always say this, Dan, I love hearing Dan speak. He's got such a passion for this subject matter, and he's very well informed. He's been telling me he's been talking on an international level, it sounds like, this week. So Dan, hey man, welcome back, and we're glad to have you.
Hey, thanks, Robbie. It's so crazy that when we were planning these for Illinois, it's like, okay, 4 of them, that sounds great. And this is the final of the 4 for Illinois, and we'll see what the future holds. Maybe there'll be more down the pipeline. I've really enjoyed even just virtually getting to know some of the participants offline as we chat in between the webinars, just sharing ideas and conversation, seeing some familiar names, and hopefully someday our paths will cross. I know I was supposed to go out to Illinois in person, and maybe that will be in the cards at some point in the future. So
we hope so.
Thanks again. Yeah, just had taken a last sip of my water right before I started. Of course, it goes down the wrong pipe. That's the worst thing that could happen to someone who speaks, is you take that bad sip and it goes the wrong way. So we'll get through the next 45 minutes. It'll be okay. Lot of information. Welcome, everyone. Glad to be here. It's 82 degrees and beautiful outside here in New Jersey. And I definitely see a good afternoon of running or exercise in some capacity outside later on. So welcome. Glad you're here. And we're going to talk about some things today that overlap some of the previous sessions, but going a little bit deeper. Don't be nervous. There's 57 slides, and I have 45, 50 minutes. So I will likely not get through all of the slides. And anyone that knows me knows it's not so much about getting through all of the slides. Sometimes I like making the slides available to people to peruse and review on their own. Some people come to the table with different elements of knowledge. Some might be more familiar with sports gambling, and some might be more familiar with internet gambling. So I like to include all of the information as it connects, and then you can review it. And certainly what's been happening, which has been great, is that organically questions come during the week via email. And they'll say, hey, I was reviewing your PowerPoint, and on this particular slide, can you talk a little bit more about X? Happy to have that dialogue. So this is just a great opportunity to learn and to share ideas and to really just spend time together. So thank you for being here today. So with that said, let's get into internet gaming and esports, sports gambling, identifying the connection and addressing the issues. So we're going to just do a very brief gambling overview. We're going to talk about the connection between gaming and gambling. We're going to talk about some emerging trends. And one area that I have not spoken much about in the first 3 is the concept of skill-based gambling, which did make its way to New Jersey a few years ago, was not really well received, but a second iteration will be forthcoming. So where does it begin? When we look at images, and I love, there's different ways people learn. Some learn through text, some learn through hands-on. Images are also important. We have to think about early childhood, and I always go back and kind of mention that the two predictors that are consistent predictors of developing a problem later in life is age of onset and not having a negative experience. And we've talked about this in the previous webinars. When you have an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old that starts spending time with mom and dad and they're gambling, then they're not seeing the negative effects. They can carry that with them into adulthood, and you normalize that experience. So you're normalizing the good feeling. You've had the early onset when the brain is A, still pruning off the pieces it doesn't need, and B, the prefrontal cortex is still developing, which includes decision-making, which doesn't get completed until roughly mid-20s. The range varies from 24 to 27, and then that also assumes no prior substance use. So back in the 60s, and I always like to show this when I'm in person doing a workshop because the reactions in the audience are priceless. And we don't have time for a 1-hour workshop to do this today, but it's the marshmallow test. In the 1960s, this was done by a professor out of Stanford. And what they did is they wanted to kind of test a youth and how they responded to having that marshmallow in front of them. It talks about the impact of delayed gratification. So some, as you could see the different ages of the kids that they were testing, the younger kids just wanted to eat that marshmallow right away. And kids that were a little bit older would be able to wait. And the reward was if you were able to wait a certain amount of time, you would receive a second marshmallow. So you can either have one marshmallow now, or you can wait a period of time and you would get a second marshmallow. And what they did is they longitudinally followed those participants in that study. And what they tended to find, and again, these are tendencies, they tended to find that when you delay gratification, or you have the ability to delay gratification, they tended to find those participants had higher SAT scores, they had lower rates of substance use disorder, lower rates of obesity, they tended to have better coping and social skills and other life measures. These are all tendencies. But I fast forward to today, 2020, and it's so interesting when we think about all of the things that we have. 60 years later, I would argue that a lot of those elements still hold true. You know, it's so funny when you watch marketing and you watch commercials. I remember when the internet was slow, we used to have the dial-up connection, and the hourglass would just rotate on your screen. I'm sure many of you can relate to this. And now some of the commercials, they ask, do you want blazing internet speed? Do you want it your way? Do you want it now? A lot of the commercials talk about having it quickly and now and having it your way. Amazon Prime, get delivery in 2 days. Then you can have 1 day. Now you can order it in the morning and have it by the afternoon. So that ability of waiting really gets compressed, because what essentially is happening is our reward schedule is getting shortened. And I talked about this at the last workshop when we talked about the concept of an intermittent reward schedule with gambling. As you shorten the reward schedule, that organically will make someone impatient when that's reinforced over time. Why do I want to wait for a reward when I can have it faster and sooner? Why? I don't want to wait. But there's something that's a bit of a concern, because when we start getting used to that and we start seeing more activities that promote fast reward schedule, that tends to lead to a short fuse, more of a reaction instead of a response to certain situations. Life seems to move and fast forward. Also can lead to higher rates of anxiety, therefore higher rates of depression. Now all of a sudden, we're starting to dive into the mental health issue. So there are connections there. But if we think about early exposure to gaming or gambling, well, what does it do? Well, it really reinforces immediate gratification, the inability to develop patience or control. We talked about that early exposure. Now all of a sudden, we have to be aware of the fact that a lot of our youth today, especially after COVID-19, are learning more from home. They're on screen time more. They're playing video games on their Xbox or PlayStation or however they choose to play, Nintendo Switch. They're doing these things more and more because they're doing it remotely. Even gamblers in the state of New Jersey, where internet gambling has been legal since 2013, are able to play real money casino games on their phone in the comfort of their living room. There's a commercial in New Jersey, and it follows a guy. At one point in the commercial, the gentleman says, quote unquote, I was sitting on my couch literally with nothing to do. I put $50 into the account and I won $17,000. That commercial, I have to shake my head every time I hear it. I can't remember the last time I sat on my couch with literally nothing to do. And it's just kind of a strange commercial, but it promotes the online gambling. So as we talk today about that speed and instant gratification, remember, we're covering a few different topics. I want to first cover esports, and I'm going to cover it from a slightly different perspective than last time. I want to cover it from a marketing perspective. Because esports, again, for those of you who may not have been on some of the prior trainings, esports is competitive video gaming in real time. It's live streamed. You could go pre-COVID into an arena and cheer on your favorite esports teams. Think of it as a team sport activity, and these team members are working together, playing a video game to try to win. It's just like a team coming together to play basketball or baseball or football, only they're playing a video game and they're trying to beat another team and they're trying to win. But it's probably the biggest sport you've never heard of, right? These are professional gaming events. These are live streamed on websites such as Twitch. Twitch has streamed 2 billion hours of gameplay during this pandemic. That is an absurd amount of gameplay. The average prior to that was probably 25 to 30% of that. 500 million to 600 million hours. It's been insane because more people are home, okay? We also start finding some connections between gamers. Those who play video games tend to prefer reality style competition and TV shows because of the nature. Reality show, it has a lot of twists and turns. Sometimes it's unscripted. It kind of follows how a video game mapping system would work. It's kind of unscripted. You don't know what's around the next bend. It's happening in real time. So those two connected between what the video gamer likes to watch for entertainment versus what they like to play, they dovetail really nicely. So esports is, you could think of it as one person versus another person. There can also be teams of people versus other teams of people. Here's a chart. And again, these slides are available. You can email myself or Robbie. You'll have access to all of these slides on PDF. So if I go quickly through some, don't worry. You'll have them at your disposal if you like or if you need. Week over week, the stream. So Twitch is live streaming of video games. And what you can see here is the growth of channels, of games, of things being live streamed on either Twitch or YouTube or Facebook or Mixer, okay? So the stream titles, anyone is typing in words like COVID or Corona, that's seen an increase of 133,000%. And what people are doing is they're typing these keywords in and then they're watching live stream content containing these words. So if you want to look for content on YouTube, you'll type in the word pandemic or coronavirus, and you'll watch whatever content fits into that. And unfortunately, some of the content could be graphic, it could be ugly, it could be funny. It's just these keyword titles and the channels that have popped up have met the demand, right? Because you can see here, people are typing in these words to see what content is available. So where there's demand, there's going to be supply. So what are esports? Really quickly, we covered it before. It's competitive video gaming in real time. It's a global industry, has a huge audience. Look at the revenue. Nearly $1 billion of revenue was expected in 2020. That expectation was laid out in 2018. I would argue that number is going to go drastically higher as the coronavirus has shifted the ability to consume entertainment and also to participate in entertainment. Because an e-sporting event, an electronic sporting event, a video game tournament can be done remotely. You don't have to go in person. These are all done on consoles. So there's really no requirement to go play in person. NBA game, physically you have to play an NBA game. But what you're seeing across the industry is that NBA players will play video games of an NBA game and they'll live stream that on TV. So that's the nature of video games. They can be live streamed. What about the engagement and the marketing? One of the trends that really jumps out to me is that you're starting to see cutting the cord. 50% of people who watch esports, so these are the fans in the video gaming tournament sector, they're starting to cut the cable cord. Only 50% of them have a paid TV subscription service. The way people consume media and entertainment, it's shifting. A lot of folks will watch Netflix, they'll watch Hulu, they'll watch stuff on demand. We don't see a lot of real-time television watching. That's why marketing advertising rates are really struggling because the viewership has come down. Super Bowl still holds a high price tag for someone who wants to advertise because that's a global event. But on your everyday Thursday night, 8 p.m. primetime show, it's not like what it used to be. So the marketing and convergence is fascinating. When we start talking about esports and video gaming, we're starting to see gambling that occurs. Now, you might say, how is there gambling in video games? Well, the images on this screen, and forgive me, one of them on the top left is a little blurry. The top left image, you can see a very colorful wheel. That is for a video game called NBA 2K20. That's a basketball video game. You would never think that what looks to be a casino floor would be in a video game basketball. It would be in a video game with basketball as a theme. But what NBA did is that they allowed you to kind of enter a casino to try to win coins and prizes so that you could then upgrade your players. So they use it based on a gambling theme. And this is some of what you're starting to see. You're seeing gambling elements exist within video games. Going backwards, the two on the right, those are called loot boxes. Perhaps you've heard the term loot box. A loot box is basically I want to say from the research, it's called a random reward mechanism, but you can think of a loot box almost as a slot machine, right? You have to pay to play, generally speaking. You'll spend a certain amount of money to try to win something of value. And what a loot box is within a video game, it contains items of value that might make your character look cooler. There might be something that makes your weapon look more intense or fierce. So that's called a skin. A skin is anything that you can use to decorate a character or a weapon. And some skins have certain values. Some are more rare than others. So sometimes you'll buy a loot box and you'll receive a very rare item, and it'll tell you it's rare. You'll know it's rare by the colors and the sounds. And all of a sudden, you've earned something of value that's rare. But that also reinforces a behavior. And so what we see in the video game industry, which is largely unregulated, and I want you to just marinate on that for a moment. The video game industry is largely unregulated. So loot boxes in the United States are not considered a form of gambling. If you go to other countries, Belgium, China, there's different rules and laws. They fall under the Gambling Commission in Belgium and China. And these are regulated activities because you have to spend something of value in order to try to win something of value where there is risk or uncertainty. That is the definition of gambling in a nutshell. Now, there are times that you can receive loot boxes and not spend money to get them. You can achieve a certain level. You can buy 2 boxes of Kellogg's Pop-Tarts and turn in the UPC symbols, and then they'll send loot boxes to your digital device. That is a thing that I've seen over the last 2 years. And so while you're not directly paying for the loot box, you're still, either spending something of value in another form, or even if it's free, the mechanics and the gambling aspects are still embedded within the loot box. So again, a loot box is a random reward mechanism. The eligibility is the triggering event. The random procedure, that's the hook. And for anyone who's heard me for the last few weeks, we talk about the nature of gambling. What makes gambling so difficult to give up is that every so often you win. And so the same applies for those who play video games, who spend money on loot boxes. Every so often you win. And winning for some people is more addictive than others, right? It feels good to win because what happens? Well, one of the things that happens is we get that dopamine burst. And all of a sudden it feels really good. And I want to do that thing again that made me feel good. It took me out of a negative mood state. It took me out of a negative pain state. So why wouldn't I want to do that again? And so it helps you understand a bit how when someone experiences a positive outcome by opening a loot box, that they might say, wow, that felt really good. I now have this rare item. It makes me look cooler to my friends. So for a youth or an adolescent, the ego is boosted a bit more, their self-esteem, their identity. See how it ties in? Because these skins, how somebody looks to another person, it matters. And it doesn't just stop at adolescent and teen. This carries into adulthood. We see this on how we share Facebook pictures, Instagram posts, using filters, using the right lighting on a Zoom webinar that I'm about to be on with my colleagues. Do I have the right lighting? How do I look today? Did I do my hair? This carries on for some, and it weighs on people differently. Some don't pay much mind to it. Others, they have to structure their day around it. So it's interesting. You just always think, where do you fall along the spectrum, right? So gambling mechanics in video gaming with random reward mechanisms. So what's the connection here? We're talking about connection today. And what I'm saying is that in video games, when you have someone who can spend money on a loot box, again, loot box, a random reward mechanism, there's some similarities here. There's the mechanics that, the loot box looks like a slot machine, right? Every so often I will win something of value. I don't know how often, how much, or when. Same thing applies. So the gambler's fallacy applies to video gamers who buy loot boxes. Sometimes people overestimate the chances of receiving or winning an item they want the most during a run of bad luck. Somebody will think, I've lost 8 straight times, or I've gotten nothing opening these loot boxes 8 straight times. Now I'm bound to get a better loot box on the 9th open, right? And we hear that sometimes, that people overestimate their chance of winning after a string of bad luck. You also get the concept of a near miss, that when you're very close to winning something big, look at the visual on this screen here, a slot machine, you can see how close you were to winning blazing sevens. That would have been a big payout. On a slot machine game, blazing sevens on that game is a big payout. The individual might think that they were so close to winning. What they don't understand is that there's a lot of mechanics that go on in a slot machine. They really weren't that close to begin with. So it's really tricky. The same applies in video games and buying loot boxes. You can spin a wheel and the wheel will slow down right near something that's very rare, and then it'll just tick one notch further into the not so rare or the more common item. And you can sit there saying, I was so close. Oh, I got to do this thing again. And that's the initial reaction. That's the reaction that people have. I'm so close, I want to do this thing again. You'll also see elements of things called losses disguised as wins. So in a video game, you'll receive items in a loot box, but did you really receive much of value if they're all common items? And what I mean by a common item, it might just be a regular everyday pair of pants or a shirt that's not colorful or very exciting. So you did win something, but did you really? It's really a loss disguised as a win, okay? And then when we go through a few more of the mechanics, that concept of cognitive entrapment is very crucial here. That's your sunk cost bias. And the way that you can think about that is continuing despite negative consequences. Once you've invested, once an individual has invested a lot of time or energy or money into something, they have their sunk cost. So they'll continue to escalate their commitment. They'll continue to pursue this thing. Listen, we see this in relationships. How many times, perhaps, whether myself or others on the call, you're in a relationship and you don't know where it's going, but you've invested a lot of time and energy and effort, and you don't know if it's being shared or reciprocated on the other end. It could be in an employer. It could be a relationship of any kind. So the concept of cognitive entrapment is alive and well as we talk about gaming and gambling. And then we also have the illusion of control. People tend to think they have a better chance when they're able to select, and also chasing. A gambler will chase their losses. A gamer might chase a high score. Maybe in a game where they had 7 kills or 7 successful shots. Now they want 8. Now they want 9. They're chasing a moving target. And that's the nature of what's interesting about a process addiction. If you think about gambling as the only non-substance related addiction or disorder, according to the DSM-5, you're chasing a moving target. We've heard several stories from those who struggle with pornography. They're chasing an image in their head with internet pornography, chasing an image. And once they've achieved or come close to achieving that image, they'll think of something else. It's a moving target. And it's hard to escape something that's constantly a moving target. So we talked about gambling. It's a variable ratio payout. It's intermittent reward schedule. And the surprise element is when you win. It just feels really good. And the problem is you don't know how often that will occur, when, or for how much. Let's get to polling question number 1, Robbie.
I'm trying to get my mute button. Here we are. Okay, launching poll question number 1, and it asks, speaking of loot boxes, a loot box is defined as what? Is it a pirate's treasure? Or is it B, the name of a video game for PlayStation?
PlayStation. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that was my bad. It's not PlatStation, guys. I fat fingered it. PlayStation. C, a random reward mechanism that contains a virtual item in a video game. Or is it D, none of the above? A loot box is defined as a pirate's treasure, A, or B, the name of a video game for, that's PlayStation, sorry guys, or C, a random reward mechanism that contains a virtual item in a video game, or D, none of the above. So a loot box for Pop-Tarts, huh, Dan?
Yeah, Overwatch was one of the video game titles, and if you buy 2 boxes of Pop-Tarts, you get to redeem those symbols for an Overwatch loot box.
Oh, wow.
Fascinating.
Something. Okay, I'll give us a T-5. We've got 90% that's voted. And the answer is C.
Very good.
Which 98% hit right at the last moment. Yep. Great job, guys.
Excellent.
Yep.
And what's fascinating about Pop-Tarts is the one thing that you can really eat, whether you toast it or not toasted, they taste good either way. So for a gamer who's playing a video game, they can eat a Pop-Tart, put it down, keep playing. It's an easy food. It's even how they target and market the foods. It's fascinating which ones will promote those certain things. So thank you all. That was correct and job well done. And I'm not a really hard test giver either. So that will become apparent. Why is gaming or gambling popular? Well, we have a couple of items here. Gaming and gambling, they provide a lot of similarities. They provide social connection, dopamine, temporary escape. But the one I want to highlight, purpose, identity, and meaning. What's interesting about a gamer is that sometimes someone who spends a lot of time online playing a video game, that becomes their identity. They are that individual. They're that avatar. They're that person. They just decorated their avatar as they would want to be seen or viewed within that gaming system. And sometimes that carries over into an extension of real life. The example I'll give, which is an extreme example, if we remember several years back in Aurora, Colorado, at the movie theater, there was a tragedy. There was a shooting, a mass shooting. And I was out in Colorado. I travel out there once a year. And I was at a conference, and I was actually sitting in listening on a panel of folks struggling with heroin, and they were in recovery. And one of the gentlemen on the panel was best friends with the shooter of that Aurora movie theater shooting. And he developed his heroin addiction after this all happened. And he just turned to a life of drugs to escape and numb pain and drinking and a whole bunch of stuff. But what he mentioned that really stuck out to me is that his friend saw himself as the actual video game character in real life. He started dressing the part, started acting the part. So that became his persona and his identity. And unfortunately, that's what something that contributed towards the actions he took. One point that I always receive pushback on, people ask questions. They say, violent video games are the sole cause of the mass shootings. That sentence is a loaded sentence, because I don't know that we can ever say that one thing is the sole cause of anything. So I will always listen, and I can appreciate the notion that, yes, violent video games are problematic, and it can lead some people down a path of doing things they otherwise would not have done. But there are also usually, oftentimes, other co-occurring issues that are going on. Okay. So as we move through here, forgive me, my screen froze. Pathways to adolescent gambling, I'll just quickly move through this because we've kind of covered a bunch of these. What we're concerned about is that when you expose gaming early on to youth, adolescents, teens, that constant exposure of gambling mechanics can normalize the experience. There's no regulations. You can have a young person download an app on their phone for a social casino game. Social casino games are games that look and feel like a casino, but there's no real money involved. They can play these on PlayStation. They can play a game called Grand Theft Auto. And there was a Las Vegas edition of Grand Theft Auto. And you could go into a casino every day and gamble. And the problem is, though, for a lot of these games that use video gambling format or slot machines, the concept of money is kind of skewed. I'll give you the example. If you've ever heard of the game Grand Theft Auto, it allows you to kind of run a criminal enterprise, and you can be as bad as you want. But on the back of the video game, when you buy the actual hard disk at, say, a GameStop or a video, which people don't do much anymore, the back of the game jacket does say, when you log in and join this account, you can start your criminal enterprise with $1 million. And it's just interesting when I saw that. It's 1 million, not real money, obviously. It's in-game currency. But it devalues how people think about the use of finances and money. So now an individual is starting their criminal enterprise in this video game with $1 million fake dollars. I've known kids that are 17 that play that game. They go right to the casino, and they're playing blackjack $10,000 per hand. $10,000, because that's what's normalized. So now when they turn 21 and they go to the real casino, are they going to be getting the same rush playing for $2 a hand, $5 a hand? I don't know. But they're certainly not going to be able to play for $10,000 a hand of real money. So there's a disconnect in how things are portrayed in fantasy versus what they are in reality. And some people have a hard time kind of separating the two. And that's where the problems can start to occur. So that's where you start running into the problematic cognitions with gaming too. Right? Sometimes people don't know when to stop. They continue. They keep playing until they've completed a level or a reward. It gives them the ability to escape the real world. Their computer or their console becomes their electronic friend, and I use that in quotes. But look at this quote from Steam Spy in 2019. The goal of companies producing video games is to identify, harvest, and then mine the motivation of gamers while administering the digital dopamine drip they crave. If you take nothing else out of today's 1-hour webinar, and I hope you take a lot out of today, the phrase digital dopamine drip is something to definitely think about, because it's not just in the gaming world, it happens to us all around. Every time your phone makes a noise, that you get a like, you get a text message, a phone call, somebody sending you something, there's a lot of noises that come through our phone, it comes through our laptops, it comes into our life. And that digital dopamine drip is powerful, because that's what maintains, that's what begins any type of behavior. And that's what we always have to be aware of. Where do our digital dopamine drips come from? And if it's starting to cause a problem in our life and how we think and view the real world, or if it's starting to impact our relationships or our job performance, then we need to be aware of them and make adjustments. So for video gaming, what's the connection with gambling? Well, as we've covered, esports, when you have competitive video gaming in real time, in the state of New Jersey, esports is considered a form of sports betting. So the connection right away is the fact that you can wager on these contests. So I can wager on an esports contest under the sports betting legislation in New Jersey. And then when you start taking a look at the embedding of loot boxes within video games in general, well, there's some convergence there, because now I get to spend money to try to win something of value. Yeah, that looks and feels like gambling. And then you start looking at the marketing and the advertising, you'll start seeing partnerships with celebrities and casinos and arenas. Well, now the lines are getting blurred even further. So some challenges to prevention, as I just mentioned, when the lines are blurred, it's hard to differentiate between gaming and gambling activities sometimes, especially in research. You know, does a person have a gaming disorder? Do they have a gambling problem? Do they have an internet use problem? You know, what is the true issue that's going on here? Because a lot of times the speed, the aesthetics, the structure of the games, they look very similar. But as we know, both can create harm through excessive involvement. So to that end, the World Health Organization last year finally classified internet gaming as a formal disorder. This is in the latest revision of the International Classification of Diseases, and they said this is for the first time that this is now a formal disorder. In DSM-5, which was produced in 2013, it was not named a formal disorder. It was under review because there were some folks who said, well, what is it we're trying to quantify? Is it video game addiction? What is the disorder we're trying to get our hands around? So let's just wait. So it'll be interesting when the World Health Organization in 2019 has now classified and named gaming disorder and also hazardous gaming in its latest list of classified diseases. And that will occur through a pattern or persistent recurring gaming behavior. And it says offline or online, right? So it doesn't have to be video games. It can be board games like Monopoly or the Game of Life or a Stratego. I'm going way back. I'm 44, but I still love playing some of these games with my kids. So when you look at some of these games, it could be online or offline. And now you're starting to see impaired control, increasing priority, right? That's preoccupation, escalation despite negative consequences. So you're starting to see some elements, and this impacts no more than 1% to 2% of people worldwide, but gambling disorder also impacts 1% to 2% of people worldwide. So the next logical question is, how many people who suffer from gambling disorder would also either be predisposed or also suffer from gaming disorder? That's something that's being studied right now. Robbie, polling question number 2.
All right, poll question number 2. Let's see if I got the spelling right on this one. Okay, all right. It's a lot of acronyms, so perhaps I got this one. Okay, which organization or publication recently classified internet gaming, not gambling, as a formal disorder? Is it A, the DSM-6? Is it B, the NWO? Is it C, the WHO? Or is it D, WWE? Which organization or publication recently classified internet gaming, not gambling, as a formal disorder? Is it A, DSM-6? Is it B, NWO? Is it C, WHO? Or is it D, WWE?
It's funny, the other day, WWE is one that, I mean, I was laughing because I was watching an old replay of the WWF,
Uh-huh.
WrestleMania 3, when Hulk Hogan was up against Andre the Giant
That's right.
from the Pontiac Silverdome, and just watching the screen capture and how the television performance was in
Yeah.
1987, it
Yeah.
was fascinating. It's just fascinating.
Was that on the HBO documentary Andre the Giant? I think he has one that's
No,
great. Yeah, but that's
no,
it's a great.
it was on
Yeah.
Fox Sports. It was a replay on Fox Sports.
Oh
I'm really
wow.
getting desperate for content.
Yeah. Well, that's what's happening in the sports world today with COVID. Yes,
That's right.
definitely.
That's right.
Okay, we've got 95% that's answered, and yes, the answer is C, the WHO, World Health Organization.
Yep, there's no DSM-6 published yet. That's the DSM-5 is the most latest revision. And the NWO would have been the New World Order, which was part of the WWF and wrestling in the old days. So thank you all for participating in that.
Yes.
As we move through here. Potential risk with gaming, we've covered a bit. We talk about the worry about marketing and advertising. Could gaming become a gambling drug or a gateway drug? Potentially for some, sure. When you normalize an experience early on with gambling mechanics and a person doesn't see the negative potential or the negative consequences, absolutely that can be a risk. Also, the fact that you can download a game and play it for free, and then over time you think you can become good at a game, so then you're more inclined to put real money into that game. That could become a concern as well. Are social games a relapse trigger for disordered gamblers? The simple answer, we don't know. I mentioned this in the past, Dr. John Grant out of Illinois, wonderful, works with a tremendous number of gamblers. His answer would be, I don't know, try it out. If it starts creating problems, let's talk about it, right? We don't know what's a trigger for another person. But social casino games is one that's really interesting because these games are not considered real gambling. They have the look and feel of gambling and they contain elements of gambling. But the concern is that you can have any age child click a box that says they're a certain age and play the game. I was on a phone call with a gentleman out of the UK, and he ran a report that said 99.8% of people who play social casino games are over the age of 18. 99.8% of people who play social casino games are over the age of 18. And I thought that number was way too high. So I called him up and I asked him the question. I introduced myself and we chatted. And I said, how did you arrive at this conclusion? Can I see the research? How did you test it? He said, oh, well, they check the box that they're over the age of 18. And I laughed. I literally laughed. And I said, what's funny is that at the time, I had a 7-year-old daughter. I said, I have a 7-year-old daughter. And you know what she's really good at? She's good at checking boxes. And she doesn't care what it says. She just knows that she can check a box. So I really don't agree that 99.8% of people are over the age of 18. There was some research done by Zendel and Schulten, and it analyzed Android social casino games, 2,300 of them, over the past 8 years. They found tremendous growth. There were 33 million installs in 2012. In 2020, that's up to 1.39 billion. Look at that growth. 33 million to 1.39 billion. And that's because of mobile gaming, the ease of access, the smartphone, just growing. But that's exponential growth over an 8-year period. The products change faster than the research, and there is a lot of convergence, and there's more regulations. And the concern is there's not a lot of warning messages on these games. So one of the areas we have concern of right now is during coronavirus in the state of New Jersey, we're seeing a large shift back to the online poker and casino games. Sports bettors are now going back, and the revenue for the last 2 months in the New Jersey market has shown tremendous growth in internet gambling. So traditional style slot machines, card games, poker games. And that's one of the concerns, is that you start seeing people who are chasing a feeling, chasing losses, and that's a real concern. People aren't content when there's nothing to bet on at times. And so they'll find whatever they can. And this is rapid, continuous forms of gambling. And that's also more likely to enable risky forms of gambling when it's rapid and continuous. As we go through here, the impact of technology on gaming and gambling, I won't go too far here, but as you'll see, there's these 10 factors, this impact of technology. These 10 items listed here have greatly impacted gaming and gambling, especially that anonymity piece with internet gambling. No stigma, no fear of disappointment. It's just you can do it in the comfort of your living room, in your own home, in your pajamas, whatever you want to do at any time. I'm going to go quickly through here because we did talk enough about gaming sites. You know, Candy Crush, many people have played Candy Crush. It's really not a game of skill per se. Some people call it a skill, but it's really every so often there'll be a piece of candy that's randomly dropped that matches a certain amount. So people tend to overestimate their ability in Candy Crush when it really is essentially a game of luck. And the success is dependent on the array of colors that are randomly given. It has very little to do with your swiping skills. It really does. So as we do a summary here, we take a look at the issues around gaming and gambling, that interactive rapid feedback, it's submersive, there's privacy, the digital currency. This age of modernization of digital payments is something that's fascinating. It's rapidly being talked about in light of COVID. How do we keep people safe? The handling of money and person-to-person touch points are trying to be reduced. And in the world of gambling, digital payments are preferred. But that also speeds up the play, makes for more continuous action. And that can be concerning when you're reinforcing the behavior faster and faster. It's that neural pathway in the brain that gets strengthened and reinforced. And all of a sudden, you start wearing through that neural pathway. It becomes the way that an individual operates. Let's get to polling question number 3, Robbie.
All right. Poll question number 3, and the final one for today, asks, it's true or false. A freemium refers to games that are typically free to start, but then provide the option to spend real money during gameplay. Mark A if that's true, or B if it's false. Freemium refers to games that are typically free to start, but then provide the option to spend real money during gameplay. Mark A if that's true, or B if it's false. We're already nearing over 70% now, so folks are answering in quick.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah, we're still at 100%. 86% have voted. I like the story, Dan, that you told about 8 years ago, calling the researcher. I laughed out loud. I'm glad I was on mute because I laughed out loud before you even said it. Yeah, so great story.
It's crazy what you hear when people say, yeah, this is our statistic. And that's the danger of quoting and citing statistics, is we always have to understand where the information comes from.
Right, yeah.
But we can understand general concepts in statistics. So yeah, that was comical to me as well.
Good point. Okay, the answer is true, and we're at 100%. Great job, guys. We're at 90%, so.
Way to go. And I even glossed over the freemium, and you guys are spot on. Guys and ladies, you're spot on. Sports betting, last point here. And I want to take because I want to leave 5 minutes at the end this time. I always say I do, and somehow there's so much content to cover. I'm used to doing presentations and workshops that range from 2 to 6 hours. So getting everything down to 1 is difficult at times because there's so much going on. Sports betting. So we've talked in the past about sports gambling, and what I delivered in terms of emerging trends and dangers of sports gambling was the fact that it can be done on the internet in some states, in all states illegally, right? You can do that illegally in many states, if not all, but legally you can only do legal sports betting in a handful of states around the country, New Jersey being one of them. Illinois, it'll be interesting when we start returning from the coronavirus, where the legislation stands. I know there are a couple bills pending. We don't know how far they got pushed pre-COVID versus how they might change post-COVID. So stay tuned for that. So it'll really be interesting. But also in-play betting, because when you have internet gambling available, it makes it easier to bet on a game in the middle of the game. So if I wanted to bet pitch by pitch in a baseball game, I could bet the Cubs. I could bet if Schwarber is going to hit a home run on the next pitch. I can bet if the White Sox are going to beat the Cubs, in a full game, or I can bet in one inning who will score more runs. There's endless possibilities of bets. And then the cash out feature. If I can bet during a game, I should also be able to cash out early. So if I made a bet, I also want to have the ability to take my winnings or limit my losses. I've shared this slide in the past. But a future wager, this is an early cash out option. And the way I describe cash out, for those of you that ever watched or know of the show Deal or No Deal, when Howie Mandel was doing it, the individual would open suitcases. And the goal was to try to open as many small cases as possible so that you could leave the bigger cases on the board. And after you opened a certain amount of cases, what would happen? For those of you that know the show, Howie Mandel would call up to the banker. The banker sat up in the distance, and this was a person who was giving an offer to the player to either take the money and run, or you can continue playing. And basically, it's a discounted present value. It was a mathematical equation that also took into consideration behavioral economics, the thought of being on TV. There's a lot that goes into it wasn't just something simply like the discounted present value. There was also some behavioral economics at play as well, since this is a live TV show. And so the individual could then choose whether or not they wanted to take the money and run, or if they wanted to continue pressing on. That's what early cash out is. Same concept. Person can be given an opportunity, hey, you can take and win $3,800 now, or you could decline the offer and you can still try to win $10,000. What would you choose? Right? That's a question we ask ourselves. Which camp do you fall in? I know I would take the 3,800 guaranteed. But some people might look at it and say, I only bet $50. So if I lose, I'm only losing $50. That's an interesting perspective, because you have a guarantee sitting in front of you. Are you really only losing $50? Or would some people think that you're actually losing $3,800? That's how I would look at it. So it's interesting how people perceive things. But the power of television. Let's talk about sports gambling from the power of television, because there are a lot of sports embedded gambling promotions, and TV is still a strong source of socialization. As much as we talked about marketing, advertising rates dropping, people consuming media differently, television is still a great way that we learn, that we observe human behavior. There's tons of shows. And so we did a lot of observational behavior. And that occurs through images and values and ideation portrayal. So we start seeing that a lot of media exposure helps to shape our behavior. Why do I say that? Is because when you start watching TV or going to a ballpark, like the XFL had its first year this year for XFL was an offshoot football league. They were very upfront, in your face, with promoting odds, in-play betting. The announcers would talk about gambling during the game. They would talk about the point spread. They were portraying it very bluntly. But you also see, if you go to an arena, like a ballpark, like there's Fenway. Okay, there you go, Robbie. I put Fenway in there for you. No one's going to a ballpark these days. It looks like the stadium's kind of empty in the lower left there anyway. And, operator logo, they partner with MGM. There's signage. There's commentary. So there's a lot of gambling talk is almost so socially acceptable, just like gambling is. Gambling is a socially acceptable form of entertainment that over 90% of people can do with very little issue. The problem is, Dr. Mark Griffiths did some research on the role of marketing, promotions, and problem gambling. And what he tended to find is that those who intend to bet more frequently or participate with in-play wagering, they also tend to have moderate to severe problem gambling severity index scores. So the people that are looking for that constant reward schedule, that I need to have these microtransactions of betting, I want to bet pitch by pitch, I want to constantly bet throughout a game, they tend to have the higher problem gambling scores. They also tend to have a previous experiencing gambling in general, obviously. They also tend to have positive attitudes towards the marketing. That's because they probably receive promotions that keep them coming back. Because remember, when a gambler starts running into problems, their finances might take a hit. So they're looking for a bailout. They're looking for more promotions. They're looking for free money. And so they'll have a positive view of the advertising. So as we wrap up here, how does it connect? I try to put 3 simple slides here. How does it connect? When you take video games that are based on skill, games that you can play on your Xbox or your PlayStation, and then you're allowed to bet on those games through, it's a form of sports betting. That's where you get esports from. So that's what esports is. It's skill-based video gaming that now you can actually watch on TV, and in some stage you can wager on. That's esports, professional gaming in real time, and there's a prize. They're playing for money. These contestants are playing for a prize, for a trophy, and then the consumer can watch it and bet on it. What about playing a video game, though, on a casino floor? So now I want to play a game like Centipede, an old-style video game. And I've got to move that little centipede around, and I've got to avoid things. But if I do that in a casino, I can play Centipede for real money. I can play Pac-Man for real money, Donkey Kong, old style games. Imagine that. That's what skill-based gambling is. When you can take a video game and play it on a casino floor or play it on your mobile device down the road, skill-based video games where there's payout. You see, an element of the outcome is based on skill, but there's also an element based on chance. That's Candy Crush. Imagine playing Candy Crush for real money. That would be a skill-based, it's not entirely based on your skill, but it's skill-based or skill-influenced. Your skill does determine to some degree the outcome, but not entirely. And then lastly, when you have a social video game, think of a game like Monopoly or Family Feud, or even a social casino game, right? Or let's just go with Monopoly or Family Feud, and you start putting in gambling mechanics. And what I mean by that is if you play Family Feud, you're going to run out of tickets or game opportunities, but then you can spin a wheel. And you can spin a wheel and get more lives to play. You can get more tickets to play. Well, that's where you start getting into a social casino game because you're not really risking any money per se. It's the freemium model. It's free to start. You can choose to spend money if you want, but there's gambling mechanics that are embedded within that game. And that's where you start getting into social casino games. Sports betting is huge in the age of the fluid fan. Be ready. Illinois, be ready. There's a lot coming down the pipeline. I know I'll be following it very closely from New Jersey. And as I talk with Robbie and others in the state of Illinois, happy to be a resource, happy to be a point of reference so that I can always share what we see in New Jersey so that you can take the best practices and we can try to avoid any concerns or areas of missteps that we may have taken, and to try to always be a resource for people who struggle with gambling or gaming addiction. This is a silent one. This is not one you can give a urine sample for. This is not one that people are going to openly talk about because of the intermittent reward schedule. But this is one that's out there. And if you're a clinician treating substance use disorder, listen closely. You need to treat the whole person. And I'm sure you work very hard towards that. And I hope you've heard things today and over the last several sessions to say, let me treat the whole person. And let me ask someone about how much money they spend on lottery or gambling, because that could be the trigger that sends someone right back to their substance or their drug of choice, or it can be a switch in addiction to something new. So keep it fun, set responsible gambling guidelines. I'm going to leave this screen up here. Robbie, I'm finished. And I actually got done 3 minutes early today.
Great job, Dan, and thank you. And of course, we thank you for all the great webinars that you've been involved in. So again, man, I'm glad to have you, and we hope to have you back soon too.
Awesome.
And hey, I love those 3 last slides. You really positioned that well. It made me think differently on skill-based games, and just those 3, how you position that was very well explained and very well positioned, at least from my standpoint. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
And, another good point, and I talked about this too, we've done several, we've done talks and we've even done webinars just on screening and assessing. You're right, man. You've got to, if you're serving the substance use disorder population, you got to make sure you're assessing for all of it, right? The total person, as you put it. So.
And there's a G-BERT screen too. We have the S-BERT, and I know you mentioned doing a talk on the S-BERT, and there's a G-BERT.
Okay.
Yeah, so take a look at that.
Yeah.
And G-BERT screening, very similar, but again, it's along the same lines.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that might be something we might want to look to include on that. So thank you very much. Yeah. So, and speaking of that, we got to thank you from Jennifer Casey Stewart. Thank you. She's looking forward to the next one. And she's a CADC that works in the drug court. She's seen a lot of gambling issues. And as Dan said, and as we've kicked off this campaign prior to COVID, guys, I told you, hey, listen, we're going to bring in speakers. We're going to, the IDH wants us to really even triple our. We even brought in other instructors to help with the 4-day workshops because of the legislation that is going through still at this time. It's just been delayed, I think, because of COVID with the sports betting, that with the new casinos and everything. We got to keep our eyes open because there's going to be a lot more legal options with the racinos. He added 6 casinos. So I'm just kind of buying time, seeing if we're going to have any questions here. We are at the hour. Everyone is thanking you, complimenting you as I do, Dan. Again, great job, and we look forward to the next one. Please go to weknowthefeeling.org. get registered for all our upcoming webinars, and I will keep everybody posted on, the status on what's going to happen with these workshops. Listen, everybody have a great weekend, and thank you. And thank you again, Dan.
Thanks, Robbie. Be well, everyone. Chat soon.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Bye-bye.